Hey, Gabriot here with another guide, Monster Train, geared at Covenant 25, but as always, works for all Covenants. Just get a little bit more leeway on those lower Covenants if you're looking to climb. I don't think you'll find a better combo than this. Stygian and Awoken Exiled. This is the most powerful combo I have ever done a guide for. I went on a 31 win streak on Covenant 25. That's with no save scumming. I uploaded every video. I have it in a playlist. You can go ahead. I'll link the playlist in the video description. I'll also have chapter markings in the video description if you want to skip around, because as always, these are going to be a bit long. But yeah, I don't think I've definitely never came across a more powerful and consistent combo than this. I could have gotten more wins, honestly. I just pretty much screwed up pretty bad the time I lost. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into it here. And also, we'll get into it here. So, which version of TETHYS? I think TETHYS personally is the most powerful champ in the game. I think a lot of people know that she's pretty strong. You're probably going to get varying opinions on it, but she certainly isn't bad. If she was bad, I wouldn't be able to go 31-0 with her. Some things about her. Every single path is viable, which I honestly can't. I mean, not only is it viable, they're all like S tier, I would say. And I can't say that about any other champ. Probably the closest I could come is Wildenton, but I still think TETHYS has the edge, mainly because she's 1 pip versus 3 pips. To have this powerful of a champ on top of being 1 pip is pretty insane. That means you generally aren't going to have to take pip space upgrades. You generally can just build a floor with 2 banner units and TETHYS behind everything, and you're going to have a pretty good time. Now, let's go through each version of TETHYS here, just kind of one by one. Another thing about this is often you're not going you don't really go all in, on the same, like say Chillwind or Conduit, Handheld Totem. You usually don't go all 3. Chillwind is probably more often I'm doing that on, but generally I like to combine the 2. Usually I want Frostbite combined with one of the others, depending on what my deck's looking like. So it's nice to have one sweeping that gives, either sweeping or Conduit gives you a natural extra boost to health that's going to let you survive sweepers, because usually the sweepers in this game do 4 damage, and at 3 HP you're not going to survive it. With a little bit more HP, you'll have just that extra leeway. You don't have to really draw a buff card in that case, as long as you have a little bit of healing or whatnot. And then it's just nice to have like sweeping Frostbite, or if not sweeping Frostbite, just half the Frostbite. 20 Frostbite's still a lot, and -1 cost to every damage spell along with that. It's probably more powerful generally than just 40 Frostbite. But anyway, pretty much no matter what combo you go, it's going to be powerful. That's just how good TETHYS is. Now let's get into each individual thing here. So typically if I see Chillwind at the start, I'll lock it in. I do think it has an edge on the others. Just as I mentioned, it's the one you want to combo with the others, but also just early game, it has a significant edge, I would say, because it provides so much DPS and boss killing potential. The only boss you're probably going to struggle with is the same one you'd struggle with on all of them. It's just going to be that second ring sweeper boss. It's just going to kill your TETHYS no matter which version you chose. But all the other bosses, TETHYS is just going to do some serious work on. All you need is 2 or 3 hits, and that's usually enough. Even if you get like 1 or 2 hits, that's enough to severely reduce how much pyre damage you're taking. And I kind of mentioned this before, but if you don't start Chillwind, you still kind of want to search for it on your second or third upgrades. If you see it on the second one, definitely lock it in. You probably want to put 2 into Frostbite and 1 into whatever else you go is like the ideal. But even if you don't get your ideal, it's fine. Even just like 1 into Frostbite and 2 into Conduit or 2 into Sweep is pretty good. I also mentioned this before, but 3 into Frostbite's fine. I mean, 40 Frostbite, 60 damage, that's a lot of single target DPS. I just find you don't generally need that as much as like just halving the damage and making it sweep. Because if you think about it, like the 3 really big bosses in the game, the ones that are kind of, Seraph, Arcus, all them and whatnot, you're actually probably doing more damage to them with the sweeper, just because every time they're on your floor, you're doing that stacking of the frostbite with the sweep. So even like in those situations, like the boss killing potential is better for sweeping. But you know, you're not too sad to go all 3 into frostbite if you have to. Sometimes I just do it, and actually I'll have a breakdown in a few slides here of kind of what I did choose on all these 31 on the 31 wins, like which combos of Tethys I did. And I also kind of mentioned this, but it's also nice to get 1 point outside of frostbite if you start it still, just to get that extra HP to survive Pyre Wings, especially if you see like Seraph the Chaste in your future. You know you're at least facing the Pyre Wings there. And just getting prepared for, you know, and even just like sometimes it can be enough to survive spikes if you have like a lot of heal, or you can kill enemies fast enough. It gives you like that buffer room. So yeah, that's pretty much Chillwind. It's pretty good. When in doubt, go Chillwind, I would say. It's never not going to be good. It's never not going to be great. That frostbite damage is just insane. You compare it to something like Cold Kalia, which is already a pretty good unit, and it just does 3 versus like 1 point into it does 10. And you know, you can make it sweeping, get it up to 20 sweeping, even 10 sweeping is pretty good. It's already, you know, over 3 times as good as Cold Kalia. Whereas like Icy Silliphite, which is a great unit too, really is kind of more on par with a sweeping version, just kind of a loose comparison, not a 1-to-1, but kind of gives a difference of the power levels there. Now, Conduit, this is one I slept on, and I know just generally I pay attention on a few of the communities that have discussions with Monster Train, and I do think a lot of people sleep on Conduit, and I don't blame them. On paper, it seems way worse than the other two. Like, why would you ever go Conduit, right? And I just started choosing it a few times, because, like, I'm not a huge fan of starting Sweeper, to be honest. And so there was a few times I wasn't offered, you know, Frostbite at the start, and I was like, oh, I'll just give Conduit a shot. I have some high damage spells like Ice Storm and whatnot, Helical Crystallis. Let's go for it. Conduit is actually insane. I would say, on a general sense, it's more powerful than the Sweeper. It's obviously going to be situational to your starting deck, or if you transition into it, you know, kind of what your deck looks like at the time. But it's just insane how much value Conduit can provide. Like, if you think about it, if you took an Ember upgrade after a boss, right, one of the big bosses where you get your upgrades that you get to choose, and you take an Ember upgrade, if you compare it to what Conduit provides, even just one level into Conduit, it's, as long as you play just a single damage spell on any turn, it's already on par with an Ember upgrade. But usually you're playing at least 3, I would say, is kind of the average, between 3 to 6 or so damage spells a turn. And that's basically on par as if you had an Ember upgrade each time, because it's just providing that much reduction. True, you lose out on that Frostbite or spell weakness / sweeping damage, but that's just the trade-off, and I find that trade-off is often in favor of Conduit. So yeah, I prefer it in a general sense to start with it if I'm not offered Frostbite, but it's not always the case. Like, if you don't have any damage spells offered, you might just not do it. It might just make more sense to start sweeping. But it also, you know, comparing it to Handheld Totem, which is the sweeping version, it has slightly better stats. You know, I think it's like 10 and 5 versus 6 and 4 or something. So if we're talking like boss killing, it's not a huge difference, but it's enough to kind of make a difference. I don't find you're usually able to find, in those first 2 rings, you're usually not able to consistently make use of that spell weakness. So I think just in a general early game, because really the only time, in my opinion, that this combo suffers is early game. Like, early game, you could get caught off guard by like the sweeper boss on the second ring, because there's really no chance of Tethys surviving that, or you just might get caught off guard by the first boss, especially Talos, but we'll get all into that in a bit here. Definitely give Conduit a shot. It is actually super powerful, especially when you factor in later later this will become more apparent when I go over the banner units, but incant is just the most solid strategy for your banner units. All of those incant units are going to be your best top tier units. They play so nicely with Conduit. Yeah, and obviously, you know, the larger your hand average hand cost, the better that value you'll get out of Conduit. When you see things like Ice Storm, Helical Crystallis, Crypt Builder, cards like that, those should be kind of an indicator that you should consider Conduit. Even the 1 costs is pretty good. I mean, playing them all at 0 costs is pretty nice. But that's Conduit. And then Handheld, you know, I've kind of mentioned a lot of this in passing up until this slide, but you know, Handheld, it's not my preferable start, but it's still okay. It doesn't have, the thing that kind of sucks is I generally find you want to place TETHYS at the top floor on those first 2 rings to give yourself time to find stewards to put in front of her and to kill units if possible before they get to her. But the sweeping version really gets not really, you know, any benefit from going on the top floor. It can't make the only benefit it gets is that you have a sweeping attack, but in regards to like the actual spell weakness, if you're putting it at the top, you literally get no benefit out of that, and that's a pretty big portion of the Handheld Totem's kit that you're just kind of throwing away by going into the top floor. So, you know, you can't really, you get this conundrum a lot of the time, like if you're starting against some units that have rage or whatnot, or you just don't find Trained Steward in your opener, you're gonna, at the very least, probably have to go in the middle or the top, and you're just not allowed to go in the bottom because you're gonna die anyway. So that's kind of what's going on there. But either way, if I compared, it's splitting hairs. It's first world problems. Handheld Totem is still an amazing path to start with, regardless. When you're starting out, just play around with Handheld and Conduit when you're not offered Frostbite to start getting a sense of when each one's going to be better or not. It's either one's probably going to be fine, but I do prefer Conduit in a general sense. So, I said I was going to do this. I went through and just gathered what all my, both the upgrades and my TETHYS choices were. So, actually, I did end up going all into Chillwind the most at 10. But I would still say that Chillwind 2 and Handheld Totem is kind of the ideal, the most generally ideal standard. For reasons I kind of mentioned already, it's like, you don't really give up much by not getting that 40 Frostbite. You're still getting 20 Frostbite, and then you're getting a sweeping attack, which often helps, especially with certain versions of Seraph, where it's like the AoE really matters, like Diligent Seraph, for example. You really don't want those purifiers to live and keep shuffling Scourges into your deck. So, but, you know, either one's going to be fine. They're obviously the ones I did the most. And then the third most here is where we already got Conduit, which is just 1. I feel like any more than 1 into Conduit is a bit overkill. It's still fine, but I think the thing is if I start Conduit, I generally don't want to go Handheld. So really these cases where I'm going Conduit 2 or Conduit 3, it's because I was holding out for Chillwind and just kind of I either found it late or didn't find it at all. So that's kind of the thing with Conduit. But I'd say if you do go Conduit, just try to get Chillwind and put the other 2 into it. Then you're still getting pretty good DPS out of the unit. Because just Conduit doesn't really provide much stats, right? It's only really kind of there as a utility at that point. But a very good utility at that one. And then just kind of so on and so forth down here. Oh, these are all kind of one-offs. As far as upgrades go, it was almost always double draw. You know, about half the time it was just draw twice. Draw is the most consistently good upgrade for pretty much any combo that I ever do a good guide on. I would honestly say, when in doubt, just take draw. Draw just gives you the most general value. The other 2 upgrades are just inherently less value because there's really not much, you know, even though we're going Awoken, which is the one class that has card draw, like decent card draw, even then there's just not a whole lot of card draw in this game, and to basically increase your hand size every turn is much more impactful, in my opinion, than Ember or Pip, especially in a you know, combo like this where you really don't need Ember or Pip typically. The reasons I would go Ember usually involve Lodestone Totem, or just, you know, obviously really high cost stuff that I find myself having a lot of leftover cards per turn. In that case, draw is still good because it helps you dig for what you want, but it might not be as beneficial if you're finding yourself having a lot of cards left over each turn that you can't play. You might as well try to make it so you can play your whole hand each turn. And pip space, those were only really happening, I found, when I had like Lodestone Totem or some other something that made me need to go either over the banner unit, over the 4 pip kind of double banner unit standard, or if I just wanted to guarantee that I could play on my desired floor, which usually it's going to be the top floor, but it might be the bottom floor in some cases. That's kind of what's going on with the pip upgrades, but generally just draw is probably the safest route to go. And you can, don't be a robot, be a human. Evaluate your situation and deviate as necessary, but the gold standard should be that double draw upgrade. You just want cards. Having options is great, and being able to play them all out is even better. And usually with Conduit, or just simply abusing the Ember upgrade at merchants, you can pretty much guarantee that without the need of an Ember upgrade, an Ember level up upgrade. So early game Tethys, we kind of talked early game is where you really might find yourself dying often. First ring, I typically want to go to the top floor, especially if I'm Frostbite or Conduit, because that's going to allow me time to find those stewards to put in front of her and to just throw damage spells at the units in those waves before they actually get to me. Also, if I need a dig for something, Root Seeds comes in really nice here. I can buff up my Tethys, or whoever needs to get buffed up, and just fill up my hand the next turn, and hopefully I find those damage spells or whatever spells are available that I need to find. And then Sweeper is going to allow me to be on the mid or bottom just to take advantage of that spell weakness. You're probably not going to kill the bosses if you're just sitting at the top with the spell weakness. Tethys, unless you have some serious frost, like flash freeze or whatnot. But generally, you're going to want that follow-up, or else you're going to sacrifice a lot of pyre HP in the process. Even banner units, you want to take advantage, or not banner units, but like just normal enemy units, you want to try to get that spell weakness in and finish off the tankier ones. And always, you can check what's in your deck, what's remaining in your deck that you're still able to draw. I find this is actually the best moment to do these is in these first few rings, because it's so your deck's pretty small. You have a pretty good idea what you're going to draw into. That can give you an idea what you're looking at the next turn and try to make an efficient turn. And sometimes you want to try to be a little bit greedy when you can create a situation for yourself that gives you a really good chance for the most positive situation to come out. So you might calculate, okay, there's 8 cards left to draw. If I put 2 Root Seeds in here, I'm going to draw 7 cards next turn. Then I only have like a 1 out of 8 chance to not get the card I'm looking for, right? Stuff like that. That's going to help you a lot to really be efficient with those first rings, because there's not many waves in those first few rings, and every wave has to be very, very tactic, or what am I trying to say? You got to be really tactical with how you play that. You got to be very precise, or else you're gonna die, because Tethys doesn't have much health, right? Not really a noob. It's not. I wouldn't say Tethys is a hard champ to play. There's harder champs to play, but I definitely wouldn't say she's noob friendly, right? A lot of noobs complain about this champ, thinking she's weak. They're wrong, of course, because 31 wins coming at 25. But just worth saying. It does take a little bit of learning to know how to use her right and to help her survive. And I'll have some solid examples coming up here if it's not clear already. And Mark of Invasion. There's always I don't know if I put it here, but there's a few trials that are pretty good for this combo's early game, and there's a few that aren't great. Like Spikes is not great. I would say unless you're super, 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 and I mean 110% confident that you can take that on, I would not take Spikes in those first 2 rings. You typically don't have the banner units quite yet to take that on. Maybe by ring 2 you do, but you obviously don't have them by ring 1 because you're not going to have any banner units. And unless you got some serious spells, I can't even think of too many that I just generally wouldn't go spikes. Don't be afraid to skip trials. You're probably going to lose more times by taking trials you shouldn't have than just skipping them, I would say, with this combo. You really don't need to be that aggressive with trials. Now, that being said, Mark of Invasion and Armor, and I'd say damage as well, but especially Mark of Invasion and Armor, those are some trials that this combo can take on pretty consistently. Armor, it doesn't matter too much. It's going to hurt things like Glimmer and whatnot, but generally most of Stygian spells are doing 10 or more damage, so the armor is really irrelevant. And then Mark of Invasion, probably true with almost every combo. It's just not too hard of an invasion, but what Mark of Invasion might do for your early game is affect where you're going to be able to put TETHYS. It's going to depend both, what the actual troop you're facing is. Like a tough one can be if you're already facing the clergymen. That can be pretty tough to take Mark of Invasion on. You're pretty much forced to the top floor at that point. But the other ones, you might have a bit more of a choice. You might have the choice of the top floor or the bottom floor, because a lot of those other troops don't have a whole lot of damage coming in, so you can survive just sort of putting TETHYS at the bottom and just sticking a steward in front of her, and you'll probably be fine. But yeah, I'll have some examples of that coming up. In the mid to late game, TETHYS is when things start getting a little bit more easier. When in doubt, go to the top floor. Even if you're the sweeping version of TETHYS, I would say as long as you got some good spells and banner units, you probably don't even need to make use of that spell weakness at that point. It's ironically more needed at the first ones just because you don't have much in your deck, but this combo, Awoken and Stygian, has so much power between the incant banner units if you can find them, but even if you don't, just the normal banner units are still pretty powerful, and all the spells, generally I'd say 90% of the spells are just consistently so powerful that you can be fine going to the top. But that the spell weakness sweeper version of TETHYS is the one you're probably going to the bottom floor more often than not, compared to the other ones. But don't be afraid to put her at the top floor come mid to late game. You're just gonna have to feel it out. You'll know based on how you're doing whether you need that spell weakness part of her kit to be utilized or not. But yeah, so like Frostbite and whatnot, Conduit, it's better just to set up at the top and start scaling out your stuff, finding everything, hitting the waves before they can get to you. Gives you time to survive sweepers, gives you time to scale up. It's just generally the best, and especially if you have a lodestone totem, you want to go to the top. Go to the top. It'll cost a lot of energy to get those lodestone totems down, but by the time the enemies get to you, you'll be able to play out a lot of cards and sap the crap out of them. They won't even do any damage to your pyre usually. And there's things that will obviously change. That's just the general thing, is to go to the top floor, but certain enemy troops might entice you to switch that up, like especially the Scourge Shufflers like Purifier and whatnot. You're going to be pretty screwed if you have too many Scourges just unchecked, shuffling all into your deck, wave after wave. In those cases, you might want to just set up at the bottom. That way you can still play all your spells. Even if you're not a sweeper version of TETHYS, you can play out all your spells at the bottom and make use of all those incants still. And even on top of that, just your units will get scaled to the point where even if the first few get through, the first few enemies, by mid to late fight, they won't be getting through, even if you don't have any sweepers or whatnot. Usually you're going to be so scaled up that you're just taking out each wave. So if you do see Scourge Shufflers, that might entice you, if not to go to the bottom, at least to go to the middle. Because even just cutting off one extra floor is going to be better than having them get all 3 floors, right? Or all 2 floors, depending on if you can kill them at the top. And now pip fuck, this is a term I like to use now. That's when you have your floor you wanted to go to, and then obviously the pip gets reduced on it, and in that case probably just go to the middle floor. That's gonna, in both cases, it gives you kind of the next best world out of the two. I wouldn't like usually, if I wanted the top floor and I don't get it, it's rare I would say, okay, fuck it, I'll go to the bottom. Like, usually I would just go to the middle. And same with the bottom. Like, if I can't go to the bottom, but there's Scourge Shufflers, I might as well go to the middle. I might as well not just say, oh crap, I'll just go to the top then. You want to still try to lean into your game plan. And sometimes you can even make the decision that floor or whatever is so important to your game plan that you can sacrifice playing a unit, one less unit on that floor. That's also viable. That's especially more viable when you have like Lodestone Totems and whatnot. I find like Lodestone Totem is a card that kind of you don't need your other banner units at a certain point. Like one of them, it's iffy, but usually you're Hellventing Lodestone if you have it. And by that point, you get 2 or 3 Lodestone Totems. You really don't need any units. You just need your TETHYS behind them, and pretty much nothing's gonna ever do damage. And even bosses just have no chance. But that's kind of the positioning there. And keeping TETHYS alive is definitely an art. It's an art that will, once you figure out, obviously is just going to give you so much consistency. She really doesn't die that much is the thing. Like, noobs, and I was a noob once too, this has always happened to me. I used to hate TETHYS, right? She'll die a lot if you're not doing it right, and you might just think, okay, she sucks. Like, you can't keep her alive. Spikes, sweepers, anything just kills her, right? Really not the case. If you look at my, like I said, all 31 of my runs are up there. She only really dies in the first 2 rings for me that much often. And even then, by mid to late game, sometimes she'll die, but it's like, I kind of knew it was going to happen, and I'm already prepared anyway. Like, you don't need TETHYS all the time. Usually the bosses that are going to take TETHYS out are scaled such that your banner units can take them on without the need of that extra TETHYS damage. So, sweepers, they only do, like, the second ring one does like 6 damage, the other one does like 9 damage. That's really not much. If you have a unit that's tanky with a few root seeds on them, they're going to take those out. Same with, like, the boss that has spikes. He's not doing much damage. As long as you have a tanky unit, you'll take him out just fine. Yeah. And, but anyway, there's a lot of options to keep TETHYS alive. Especially when you're at the top floor. You got some of those Pyrebound cards like Siren Song, Ice and Pyre. Those are going to help and just mitigate it. Because the sweepers are usually at the front, remember? Like, the 2 main sweeping, like, normal enemies, that's going to be the dude that has 4 damage and gains Rage on Slay. He'll be at the front almost every time. The Pyre Wings will be at the front pretty much every time as well. Definitely for the Seraph fights, he's at the front. For the other, the second to last ring, sometimes he's at the back, but not too often. I think just for like 1 wave, he's that way. So, front-loaded damage is often just enough to stop the sweeper. But if you don't have enough of that front-loaded damage, there's HP buffs. Just taking 1 into Conduit or 1 into the sweeper path is going to get you a little bit of an HP buff, definitely above the 4 HP mark. You can also have things like Steel Enhancer or Cycle of Life that will just, buff the health up naturally there. There's also a ton of ways to reduce the damage. There's Sap, a lot of ways to do Sap. You got Lodestone Totem, you got Drain, you got Spike of the Stygian, you got Guardian's Amulet. You also have Frenzied Swarm, which is the Daze All units. That's another viable way. Yeah, but just a lot, like a lot of ways to do it. If you don't have them, even then, just your deck, right? And this is what, by the way, why I highly stress on draw upgrades, because the more draw you have, the more consistently you can find those answers. And that makes it so you don't even have to permafrost them. But if you can permafrost them, why not? That's just between the draw and the permafrosting, you're going to find your options. Now, if you don't have any options at all, A, you might just be really unlucky, but B, most likely you fucked up at some point. You didn't know that you should have had some answers there, and you didn't take them. You should go, I highly recommend, you can download, I use OBS, just download OBS. It's really easy to set up. Record your runs, even if you don't plan on uploading them. If you really do find yourself struggling, you might as well rewatch them. You can skip right to where, you know, just do quick, you know, skip around, figure out where your card choices were, see if you had places where you could have done better, right? I do that. I mean, that's how I develop these strategies, right? Like I do scrutinize my strategies, I scrutinize my runs, and that's how I figure out how to get better, you know. And yeah, and let's see. I guess I've pretty much gone over all this. Now we're just gonna get to a little bit of video examples. I find it's nice to always have some hands-on examples. I don't expect people to go back and watch, you know, all my runs and whatnot. So let's just take a quick look here. All right, sorry, video cut out there for a minute. Computer issues. All right, as I was saying, real good music. And so basically I chose the Mark of Invasion here. Like I said, you usually want to take it. Although this is probably a little iffy with Gathered Clergy, because that's the toughest one to take Mark on. Especially when I don't have, as you can see, not many damage spells, but I figured with the artifact I have, which is every spell I choose on that floor to play is going to have a random, like 2 damage to a random enemy. So I figured that was kind of like having pseudo damage spells, and against the Gathered Clergy, I figured I should be able to take him. I would say I kind of low rolled by not getting more than like 3 or so spells here, but it's no biggie. Like basically what I'm doing now is I'm thinking, do I play the Steward at the top? Because I know I can't play on the middle or bottom. Do I play the Steward at the top and just let him die to play a fresh one the next turn? Or do I kill one of these guys, mitigate 3 damage to my pyre, and just try to clear this out? At least I need to at least clear 3 of them out, or really 2 of them. But as you can see, I obviously can do it here just fine. So now I'll just let this. Not that I have much choice, but I'll just let this dude kill my Steward, and then hopefully next turn I'll get a fresh one. I have about a 50-50 to do it since I did 1 Root Seed, so I have literally a 50-50 to get him. And if I didn't get him, that just means I drew an extra spell, which means I probably am able to clear these things out anyway. So either way, I'm pretty set on this turn. Now I'm thinking, do I like play a Root Seeds on these guys to try to kill them? Because I do have that option. But since they're only doing 1 damage each, I'm just going to try to draw more cards next turn. I am Conduit TETHYS, so I can play out a lot of spells this turn. And yeah, I'm probably not taking any damage, right? Now I have a full health Steward, which is decent to be in. Would have been nice if I didn't have the Pip Screw at the top. I also made a slight mistake here. What I should have done is obviously gone down to the bottom there to play that Permafrost card. But Preserve, or whatever you call it. Not too big of a deal, but you should try to, you know, obviously play correct. And I played a little incorrect there, but I'm going to choose to do Root Seeds here just to try to get more value out of that Conduit TETHYS, draw more cards. I'm already one card reduced because of the Scourge card. So, and you know, this is pretty common too when you don't start Frostbite, even when you do start Frostbite, but the first ring, you might just not be able to kill that boss. And yeah, on to the next one. That's pretty quick here, but I'm basically looking through my deck trying to see what my best way to kill the Sweeper is. Sweeper's gonna obviously kill TETHYS, so you gotta develop a game plan here to kill this boss that doesn't involve TETHYS. So in this case, I have 2 banner units. I must have got a unit draft for my first, you know, fight. But Nameless Siren, she could work, but since I have the Siren of the Sea, I'll probably just focus on her since she naturally scales out some tankiness. We took the armor trial here, so Glimmer's not going to do anything to that bottom floor, so I'll just use it to kill the Collector in this case. And then Razor Sharp Edge, I have the choice of either putting that on my Siren of the Sea, or I could play it on an enemy just to bypass that armor and kill one of them. I'll do it. I choose to do the haste here just so I have some extra turns to kind of start buffing up my units. Only a few spells to play here. I'll put the Root Seeds on Siren of the Sea. That way she just has some extra damage come Sweeper time, as I mentioned before. you know, there's just not going to be really any way TETHYS even gets a hit in. Siren of this, and then Nameless Siren's only going to get, what, 1 hit in, probably. So really, we just got to focus on that Siren of the Sea at this moment. And even if it was like a Guardian Unnamed, I'd do the same. Guardian Unnamed can take this boss on just fine. Obviously, Siren of the Sea is the top tier, but Guardian of the Unnamed works too. So now this one, you know, just finish him off. Pretty standard. And then one last one here, just to kind of iterate maybe some more mid to late game style TETHYS survival. This is one where that, I forget, is it Master of Light? But basically the enemy that has 4 sweeping attack and gains Rage on Slay is going to be a part of this this mob here. So I'm debating. I'm trying to think, like, can I have TETHYS survive? If not, I'll just slap all the upgrades on Siren of the Sea, or what is that? Yeah, Siren of the Sea, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But the sweeper isn't coming yet. You have a few waves here before they come, so I'm not even putting the Steel Enhancer on my backliner yet. Now, normally, if this was an Arcus, it'd be a no-brainer. I would just put it on TETHYS. But the thing about Arcus is he has so much health. 1900 health and 25 damage. Comparing to Fel, it's a lot more. Like, it can catch you off guard. So what I've wanted to do here is make sure my frontliner is just really beefy come time to fight that Arcus. But I have the Spike of Stygian permafrosted, and it'll be a nice option if I need it to be able to get this Master of Light's sweeping damage pretty much nullified entirely. Now, one thing that sucks here is I got the Incant coming in. So right now it would kill my TETHYS if I let him come through. So I am gonna have to. I have a few options here. You know, I can do this. This may not have been the most efficient, but my thought here was like, okay, I'll kill him here. I'll still leave my Spike permafrosted, because in 2 waves, I'm going to have to deal with another one of these sweepers. And even at a double cost reduction, I can still sap it. All I have to do is apply 1 sap to that Master of Light, and that's enough to have my TETHYS survive. All I need to do is just take off 2 of his damage. So if I don't draw something that kills him, which right here you'll see I did with the Helical Chrysalis, but if I hadn't drawn that there, I probably wouldn't have killed him unless I got lucky on that Ice Storm. And then I might have just not even tried the Ice Storm, and basically just went with a Spike there, just to guarantee that TETHYS doesn't die. That's kind of the deal there. The rest of this fight is just buff up as much as I can in preparation for the ridiculous stats that Arcus has. Luckily, I've already put in about 400 damage to him just kind of in passing, so that's going to help too. But as you can see, I keep with the game plan here of buffing up my frontliner and just incanting as much to keep those buffs coming in. Pretty standard here. Might as well put the Root Seeds at this point on the backliner because he'll have the most hits. And it looks like we have some pretty good overkill on him, so that's pretty much that. Arcus is done. But even then, with that ridiculous floor, you'll see I got down to 70 health on the frontliner. So hopefully that's helpful. Oh, don't want to do that again. All right. And then Talos the Balanced. Only one variant is balanced, you'll notice. And that's, maybe I'm just a little salty because this is what ended the 31 streak win. Is that a word? 31 win streak run. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. All right. So anyway, even when I beat her, the pushback version is just so much harder than the others. I'd argue it's objectively harder. There's not too many situations where I would say the other ones are harder. You know, both the Armor 5 and her Strike are just so much more impactful than the other things. Like, what is it? You get 1 sap on one of them when your units come in. That's pretty much nothing. 2 rage on the enemy units when they come in is also literally hard countered by just simply putting your units at the top floor. Yet Armor 5, that means now you got Glimmer, any of these Vinegrass, any of these spells that don't do 5 damage naturally, now they can't kill the backliners. Like, that's actually impactful. So on top of that being already harder, the pushback is just so hard. Like, it's so important to have your frontliner be your frontliner. You know, I don't care if my frontliner's dazed. I don't care if a unit gets killed by Talos that she gets 25 armor. You know, what really sucks is getting your frontliner pushed back. That's just so much more brutal. And you're generally going to look at least 2 pushbacks during the fight. And that pretty much guarantees that your Tethys is going to die and probably not get anything off. So similar to that sweeper, the difference here is Talos actually has decent stats, so it's a lot harder to just say, you know, sort of accept that Tethys is going to die and build up a proper boss killing floor for such a high health boss, right? Comparatively, at least, to the 6 damage sweeper. But anyway, so ways around this. You definitely want to look for those early game boss killer cards. And obviously, you can see if this version of Talos is in your future, and you really need to commit it to memory in your all of the rewards and banner units that you choose up until her. You need to keep in mind that this is the version of Talos that you're facing, and you need to overcompensate for it. That's or else you're going to get caught by surprise. Even before I did this streak, this was the bitch that killed me all the time. But anyway, you know, like Flash Freeze, Wildwood Sap, these sort of like Flash Freeze, if you think about it, is like a it gives 10 Frostbite, which is exactly the amount that you'd get from or it's either 8 or 10, but it's pretty, you know, let's round it up to 10. It's pretty much the same as Frostbite Tethys. Wildwood Sap, as long as you have a frontliner that can survive a few hits, right? That pretty much, in a way, kind of doubles their health if you have enough of that stacked up. And yeah, you just want beefy banner units too. You don't want to be relying on just DPS units like Naga, Nameless Siren, or if you do just have a Nameless Siren, you might think about getting an Armor Incant upgrade or 25 HP upgrade. But you really need some tanky unit, or you're dead. And even on top of that, like Vine Grasp could be pretty good because you can use that on your own units to pull them to the front. So, you know, say you have some tank in front, Titan Sentry, Guardian Unnamed, Husk, it's just whatever you got. You don't really care too much about hitting them for 3 damage and then just, you know, pull them right back to the front after they get pushed back. That's a pretty good way around it. But yeah, definitely this is the thing you need to out of the 6 variants of that first boss, you know, this is the one you really need to overcompensate for, or you're going to lose. It's just brutal. Like, it's the one that basically says you don't get Tethys outside of some specific scenarios, aka Vine Grasp. Or Sap, or if you have a ton of Sap, you know, you can Sap her or Daze her. That's really the only 3 ways you're going to prevent Tethys from dying. Unless you have some weird way you can make Tethys into a frontliner, because she's going to be a frontliner by the time the final waves come around. Outside of those, you know, outside of actually mitigating the pushback. So let's get into the banner unit choices here. These are going to be your S tier options. And definitely the most versatile, Siren of the Sea. She can be tank or a DPS, and she fills both those roles amazingly. You know, you're incanting a lot with this strategy. You kind of see that in the video examples I put around, but especially toward mid to late game. You're just incanting so much, and to get both offensive and defensive scaling is just amazing. Even when, you know, whatever role she ends up playing for you, kind of makes her a hybrid, right? Like, she's your tank, she's still going to have a lot of damage. If she's your DPS, she's still going to have some tankiness, right? So just a very safe pick. Another nice thing about her is, like, say you get her early, but you don't really find another good unit, you could just Hellvent her before you've kind of taxed her with or filled up her upgrades, and now you can just make one of them a tank and one of them your DPS. So if you see Siren of the Sea at the start, it's pretty much always going to be your choice, I feel, unless you have really good reason. And I actually have a flowchart later to go over this, so, you know, stay tuned for that. But upgrades on her, depends on what you're doing with her, but in general, the tank is going to want to see Heartstone and Runestone. Runestone, I think, is the best because it provides, in the long run, more actual scaling. But Heartstone's just fine, especially if you have some healing cards. She really likes to see that because she's scaling out her health, and healing can really kind of get around some of the possibly slow scaling that only a 2 increase does. But Runestone is just such a... Once they made this armor 2, it became such a good upgrade. I'll put it on a DPS as well, just as kind of the second upgrade. And then obviously if it's a DPS, you want the multi-strike. The Battlestone could work just fine as well. Kind of gives some initial tankiness if you need it. A little bit of initial damage boost. It's kind of an okay secondary. And if you really need it, you could put it on your frontliner as well. It's just definitely not the ideal one. Then you got Nameless Siren, who's going to be, unless it's Seraph the Chaste, there's not a better DPS option than Nameless Siren, right? Gains essentially double the damage that Siren Sea does, which Siren of the Sea already gains a lot of damage. Double that, it's even more insane. Now, obviously, Rage decays, but I find the decay is pretty irrelevant. Like, the fights just don't go on long enough in this game for that decay to ever really be that relevant. I pretty much think of Rage as pretty much a flat increase, so I think of it as gain 4 damage. Maybe you can think of it as like gain 3.8 or something, whatever floats your boat. But you don't want her as your frontliner. I've done it. I've been forced into it before, but I wouldn't recommend it. Obviously, you want to see multi-strike, Battlestone, and Incant Armor 2 is going to be good on anything, honestly, but it's pretty nice on her. That just kind of allows her some tankiness, because she doesn't actually scale defensively like Siren of the Sea does, so that might help with some boss killing rounds, or just to give her a little bit of versatility there. And if you don't have a good frontliner, you might just want some health or that upgrade against that first boss, because you will need a little bit of tankiness to take on any of those bosses, even if it's not that hard version of Talos, Daedalus, any of them. We still need some tankiness. And it's not great against Chase, like I said, but it's actually not as bad as you think. She'll be halving your damage every time that she comes around, which is probably going to be, since you're not really doing multi-floor setups, it's probably going to be every other wave, right? But even then, you're still gaining a lot of damage. If you have multi-strike, she'll work just fine. So it's like, I wouldn't shy away from her if you see Chased in your future. She's still going to carry hard all the way up until Chased, and it's not like there's DPS units that are still like vastly better than her versus Chased, and you don't actually need much damage versus Chased anyway, because she just doesn't have much. Like Chased has the lowest, in my opinion, the lowest priority in actually killing the units. Like the Pyre Wings, like it's just a sweeper, but it only does 4 damage. I usually don't care about the Ember Drain if I've built correctly, and I usually am surviving with TETHYS. So really it ends up just being an objectively easier tank than, say, a Gilded Wing or a Dark Wing. And then obviously, if you're not aware, Adaptive Mutation works pretty nicely with her. All of that rage damage just gets converted into health, so now she can become a tank, kind of. You don't usually need her as a tank, but if you do, Adaptive Mutation is there. But even on top of that, it doesn't always do this, but it's usually giving you a boost to damage as well. Maybe 10 to 20 on average, I'd say. Really depends on just how many incants you've done or whatever else you've done in the fight so far. And then third in the list here, we have Guard of the Unnamed. Hard to beat it as a frontliner. It doesn't have any offensive scaling, but the defensive scaling is unmatched. It's going to be 150% as good as Siren's. It's really loves to see Runestone, but Heartstone works as well. I mean, 3 alone is already good enough for most fights. Maybe like Seraph the Patient, you'd want to really hold out for Runestone, but either way, like any combo of these, 2 of them, 1 of them, 1 of each, 2 of each, or 2 of 1 of them is going to be fine. I wouldn't really take anything else on him. Maybe Endless if you need it. And obviously, as we've seen, like taking on those early sweeper bosses, just putting if you remember that boss is the boss, You shouldn't die to them because you can just stick Root Seeds on Guardian Unnamed, get his damage up to between 10 and 20, and should be able to, as long as you incanted enough armor and didn't lose all that armor, should be able to take on those bosses no problem. And then Lodestone Totem is really good. I wouldn't say it's auto pick. A lot of times you have to come to the decision, like, do I need it? Because sometimes it really is awkward to play when you first add it. Now, if your setup's already good, it might not hurt to add it. It might delay a turn here and there of finding your proper banner unit. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if it doesn't have a HP upgrade, it can be a little awkward to start with. And also, since it costs 3 Ember, since you probably don't have, unless you went Conduit TETHYS, you probably don't have, like, a great setup to be able to play out the Lodestone Totem early and also play spells and whatnot if you need to. Who knows, maybe you took Mark of Invasion or whatnot. But that's just something to think about with Lodestone Totem. It's still going to be really good. If you do end up with Lodestone Totem, I'd really look into hell venting it, because why not? Like, once you have 2 or more Lodestonems on a floor, it's pretty much GG at that point. Just set up at the top, put TETHYS behind. You don't even need a banner unit. Other banner units at that point, they're just kind of nice to have. And yeah, I put utility / tank because usually it's going to be in the front. It's going to be part of your floors, part of your main floor. And with some health and all that sap, it pretty much is a tank. But really, it's just a utility unit. Now, Vine Mother's a little different. It could be a tank. It has 35 health, so 35 health for 2 pip is pretty good. So it can serve as a tank, but I find it's usually just a utility that you want to slap down on another floor. And I still want, hopefully some health. The Runestone's only if you actually are using it as a tank for your main floor. Otherwise, just slap some Heartstone, maybe a Battlestone. If you don't want to put too many, it's not like your priority unit to upgrade, but the more health you have, just the more stings it's going to generate, because you're usually just sticking it on another floor and kind of forgetting about it, not really trying that hard to preserve it. It's just a nice to have, like having a few extra stings each turn in an incant heavy deck is pretty god tier. Vine Mother's just really nice to have in that sense, but usually not a part of your main game plan unless you really need a tank on your main floor and you don't have one yet. She can serve that purpose as well. Then we got the A to B tier banner units. These are going to be the ones that you might just take early on if you didn't get offered those S tier units. And then later on, if you do find the S tier units, you can just transition into them if you need to. You don't always need to. Like, I've had, particularly these first few units here, like Husk and Siliphyte or Titan Sentry. Like, I've had plenty of runs where I just had really good upgrades poured into them, and I did find those S tier units, but it was like, I'm not going to take them because I'm already doing fine. The thing about, you'll notice that's kind of in common, other than offering Monument, is there's no incant synergy with a lot of these, so you're missing out on a little bit of that unless you got that Runestone upgrade. But that's not too big of a deal. Hopefully you don't have like 2 of these as your end game plan. Even if you do, though, I won plenty of games that way anyway, just with no incant synergy. The thing is, all of these are so powerful in their own right that you can kind of just abandon the incant. You can pretty much play as if you were doing incant anyway, because you're just spamming out all these high quality spells on the floor. And even though you don't get the incant, you still have the great effects of all these units. So, like, Husk Hermit is a nice swing unit. It's never going to fill a role in the top tier way that another better fit would fill it, but it's so flexible that it can fill them. It can at least fill them in like a, we'll give it like a B+ grade, right? So it can be a tank or a DPS. It has 30 HP, so it can fill that tank role just fine early game. If you don't end up picking up another tank, you can just upgrade the health or give it some Runestone incant, and it'll serve as a plenty fine frontliner, and even kill some backline units while you're at it, right? Or if you don't need it as a tank, but you need a DPS, it's fine for DPS too because it's sweeping, right? You can stick root seeds on it, stick razor sharp edge. You can get either a quick or a multi-strike. You know, quick's going to mitigate a ton of damage. It'll kill all those backline heavy damage dealer units before they're able to hit your frontliner. And multi-strike's just going to be for pure DPS. Either one of those is going to be fine on it. Siliphyte, it's a similar story, except it doesn't really fill the tank role. So really just same thing as Husk Hermit. It does have that added benefit of spell weakness. You may or may not use it. I would say it's pretty good if you need it to kill the bosses. Otherwise, don't be afraid to just go to the top. She's still fine as a just like I'm going to be a DPS sweeper unit, right? Titan Sentry, pretty much one of the gold standard tanks of the class. Titan Sentry is never going to be bad. It has high health. It does AoE damage that kind of scales the more you get hit, and it's especially good against bosses. You can look for any of these upgrades. Probably the ideal gold standard is just 25 health and endless, but you don't always have to go endless. You can just give it some health or give it some incant and just say, I'm going to try to keep it alive the whole fight. That's fine, but endless is pretty nice. The thing about that is you can set up the bottom. If you don't end up killing the boss off, you can just replay it on each floor, and that's a lot of extra damage. Usually no boss is going to survive that. Cold Kalia is similar to Siliphyte. I'd say it's a little less desirable because the Frostbite is okay, but the spell weakness can end up being pretty impactful if you do lean into it heavily. Like, say you fight a boss and you don't really have good boss killing things. Like this Frostbite would be good against the boss, but it wouldn't really outshine spell weakness. Like, you know, you stack 3 or maybe 3 to 5 spell weaknesses on a boss, and that's 5 times the damage of a big spell, say like an Ancient Synergy or something. And that's pretty much going to do a huge damage on any boss, much more than like, what would that, 5 times 3, like 15 Frostbite. It's not even going to compare, right? But that being said, it's still a sweeper unit, can still fill that DPS role just fine. Shattered Shell, you know, same kind of sweeper deal. It doesn't have any of these effects, but it does have some natural damage scaling, so it's pretty nice in that regard. You know, I kind of treat most of these sweepers kind of around the same area. And then Animus of Will, another unit like Titan Sentry, where it's just good in all combos. Doesn't particularly shine like it normally does, I would say. But that's just because the incants are so good in this. There's nothing like bad about Animus of Will. It's still going to be great with the root seeds. Still going to be great with Razor Sharp Edge. The large stone's going to be great on it. Adding another multi-strike, you know, just a simple 10 damage upgrade or battle stone's going to be great. And then Offering Monument. This is a unit. I love this unit in a general sense, and you know, I've had other strategies that are incant focus I use where Offering Monument is amazing. It just provides so much gasoline to just cycle through your whole deck and just provides so many incants for your units. The only thing I was hesitant to really list it higher on this list though, because I'll be honest, in this 31 game win streak, just due to variance, I wasn't really offered this unit. You know, that's just kind of what happens with the rare units. I was only offered it a few times, and it just didn't make sense for it to be in my deck. So I didn't want to like sign off on something that I specifically didn't use, like in my set of runs that I used to build up this strategy. So that's kind of why Offering Monument isn't higher. But I think theoretically, Offering Monument might be S tier. I just couldn't really sign off on it on this particular run through, just because I simply didn't use it. Now we got our, I kind of screwed that up. Anyway, unit choice flowchart. So on any, you know, the rail path that you get after your fights, in between your fights, I would generally always go toward the Stygian banner. As you can see, other than Vine Mother, all of the S tier choices were Stygian units. Along with that, there was a lot of, you basically saw every Stygian unit listed out there, right? There's no Stygian unit that doesn't make S or the A to B tier list. So you can never have a bad choice with Stygian. Whereas Awoken, there's bad choices. There's also not as many S tier choices, of course. Since you start root seeds, if you don't have consistent heal, which usually you don't, or regen, like you probably don't want to go the hollows. You know, they take up 3 pip space. Without heal, they're only 15 health. They don't make a lot of sense here. And then there's other stuff like Nemesis Speed. I just don't like that unit in general. I don't recommend her really. There's like what else? Like the Wildwoods. What is it? Whatever the dude that gains energy when it gets hit. That's not like that good of a unit. It's okay. Like if you need that tank, you could use it as a tank. It's probably better than the hollows in this particular sense, but still takes up 3 pip space, costs 2 energy to put down. Generally just the Stygians are what you want to look out for. You want to get those Sirens or Guardian on the Unnamed or Lodestone Totem. Just get those good incant units. So, you know, really go for those Stygian banners. Unless you obviously have your setup already. In that case, you don't have to, like, beeline for the Stygian banner. But, you know, we go to the Stygian banner, whatever. Maybe we got Stygian banner, or maybe we didn't. And then, do I have a tank yet? Tanks, because, you know, we're generally talking early game here when you're getting choices of banner units. Tanks are going to be more important than DPS. TETHYS already is a DPS unit, unless you went Conduit. Or, you know, especially if you went Frostbite, it's a DPS unit, right? You could argue the Sweeper is DPS because the follow-up still is damage, but anyway, like tank is, either way, tank is going to be the most important because it's the role that you don't have most likely. And on top of that, it's the role that's going to allow you to take on like that early Sweeper. It's going to allow you to take on the early boss, especially Talos, the Pusher. So tank is priority over DPS. So do you have a tank yet? No. Is a tank available? Well, if it is, pick the tank. If not, well, we go to DPS, which is the same thing as if you already had a tank, we're going to go to the DPS. And do you have DPS yet? Not counting TETHYS, of course. No. Is a good DPS unit available? Now, I say good ambiguous here, but what I'll say good is did it make my list of S or A, B tier? If yes, then pick it. If no, probably don't pick it. Like I said, Nemesis Speed is just not like, if you are, maybe if you had like Conduit TETHYS, maybe, but like in general, you just have enough DPS with TETHYS that you don't really need to be adding these kind of C tier and beyond DPS units. But anyway, yeah, if it meets that list, pick it. And as always, don't be a robot, be a human. You can deviate here a bit. Like if you really think you need that Animus of Speed or whatever, go for it. And then you know, if none of these, or if none of them, or if I should have had there should be a no here that also goes here. So imagine there's a no here. Kind of did this last minute if it wasn't obvious, but so you know, not a tank, not a DPS. Is it Vine Mother? Or do you have one yet? So if you don't have one yet and it's a Vine Mother, pick it. Now, if it's either of those, is it a Lodestone Totem or Offering Monument? And can you make it work? Go for it. If you can't, skip it. So there is your flowchart. Hopefully that's helpful. Now we're on to the spells, the damage spells particularly here. We're going to separate utility and damage out. Preserve kind of fits both, but anyway, Preserve Thorns, I should say, not Preserve the spell. So Ancient Synergy, unbeatable, one of the best cards in the game. I predict it will get nerfed at one point, but you know, take advantage of it while you can. It's insane. It just deletes units from the game. At 3 Ember, it's probably properly costed, but because this game, it's so easily to abuse Ember upgrades, you might as well just slap some Ember upgrades on it, Ember Stone. You can even put 1 Ember Stone and put Holdover on it if you have extra, like if you went Conduit or if you went Ember upgrade on your level up, you could probably swing just putting it on Holdover. I've done that a few times. It's pretty powerful to just guaranteed have a frontliner deleted. Sometimes both frontliners sometimes it just deletes the whole floor. Like if you have spell weakness, it'll delete that whole floor. But anyway, Ancient Synergy, pretty hard to beat. Ice Tornado, and it's also one you kind of want to Hellvent just because it's so good. Ice Tornado, it is much more powerful early game but it'll carry your early game, especially if you can get some Emberstone upgrades on it. It's basically AoE at that point. There's not too many mobs early game, or really the whole game, that have more than like 3 units in them. And at that point, you're pretty much consistently killing the backline with Ice Tornado, while also putting some extra damage on the front line sometimes. And then it also doesn't care about like armor. So any sort of trials or bosses that add armor, Ice Tornado don't give a fuck about. It has the flexibility of, if you did already clear out the backline through other means, it does a lot of damage, at least in the early to mid game, to a single target. And even late game, if you have any form of spell weakness, it's still relevant. Just a really good card. Definitely shines early game though. Like I wouldn't pick it like later game if you didn't need it. Then Titan's Gratitude. Now I'd put one trait in here, like needs upgrade. That should probably read like needs damage upgrade, but like this is a card that's like okay on upgraded, but significantly better if you can find that damage upgrade. So either one of them. Surge Stone. The thing about Surge Stone on a lot of these damage spells is like you only really need that damage unless you're really heavily invested in spell weakness gameplay. Unless you're heavily invested in that as like your, at least like your boss killing, you really don't care too much about consuming them, because it's really just the first few waves that you need those heavy damage spells for, because that's when your units aren't necessarily scaled up as much. And just having those kind of have a ton of extra damage and consume is a good thing. You almost don't even want to draw back into them, because at a certain point all you care about is just scaling your units, because they're already killing the waves and you just want to prepare for the boss. So that's kind of what's going on there. Power Stone or Surge Stone is like equally good. And same story with Crypt Builder, I'd say. If you have like, Crypt Builder is a little more situational in that, like, if you have a lot of discard, it's less in need of an upgrade. But still, to really realize the value of Crypt Builder, you do want to put some sort of damage upgrade on it. Surge Stone, Power Stone, either of them. Permafrost is always good on these type of cards too. It just allows you to, if you missed out on getting the offering value, if you have some other discard, you can kind of just cycle into it next turn or turn after and try to get that offering value. Same with Titan's Tooth. Titan's Tooth can be a holdover target as well. If you are in dire need of like consistent AoE, particularly fights like Seraph, the Temperate, that have 30 damage backliners. Yeah, you probably want some AoE on a holdover there, or if not AoE, some sweeper that has quick. So that's an option there. Same with Glimmer. Glimmer's another one of those cards, just needs that damage upgrade, not because it's attuned or anything, but simply because that 2 damage is only really going to do things for you the first 3 rings or so. It falls off heavily after that if it does not have damage. Unlike a lot of these other though, I typically don't want to put Surge Stone on it, just because it is a card I want to see coming back, and usually I'm putting it on holdover. It's just nice to be able to heal your units and clear out the entire backline every turn. It just pretty much solidifies most of the fights in this game, and it's hard to lose when you have a plus 10 magic power and held over Glimmer. And then Preserved Thorns, it's just such a, when you're in an incant, I mean, it's a great card in general. They nerfed it. It's not that bad of a nerf. Just slap an Emberstone if you really need it at 0, but generally you don't even need that. Just such a good card. You get so much incant value. You get a lot of damage, even more if you have spell damage or those sting artifacts. You don't need them though. Like just simply getting 4 free incants. Well, it used to be free. If you get Emberstone, it's free. Otherwise, it costs 1. But essentially free. 4 free incants on the turn, along with getting that extra damage and then filling your hand up pretty much to full the next turn. Turns out is a pretty powerful thing to do on any given turn. Yeah, along with that, it's also kind of a soft counter to Seraph the Diligent. You can use it as a consume the turn you play it, and then 3 turns in the future you'll have stings that are pretty nice in consume targets for Diligent. So yeah, and similar to Ancient Synergy, just such a high value card that it kind of begs to be hell vented a lot of the time. And then we got the A tier damage spells here. almost as good as the S tier, but not quite. Helical Chrysalis kind of just gets outshined by a few of those other damage ones because they either have more inherent value or better upgraded value. But that's no knock against Helical Chrysalis. That's really just highlighting how powerful those other cards are. Helical Chrysalis is still an amazing card, particularly good early game. Really wants to see an Emberstone upgrade, in my opinion. At 1, it's much less awkward to play and much better value. And then Magic Power is pretty good on it too. It gets double. It's not as good as an Entombed card, but it still gets double, which is pretty good. And if you have spell weakness, it can still be relevant come late game, but definitely more of an early to mid game card. And then Flash Freeze. I've grown the more and more I play Stygian, I've come to love this card. Like it was hard for me to really evaluate how good it is. It's arguably S tier, but I'm leaving it in A tier just because late game it's not quite as relevant. The only reason I would put the plus damage is if I did see like a version of Seraph in the future where I thought maybe I need, because it only does 3 damage unupgraded, which will, with the 8 Frostbite, it will kill a backliner, but it won't necessarily prevent them from attacking you. So like Seraph the Patient or Seraph the Temperate, where you got those 30 damage backline dealers, the Shade Wings. It might be worth it just to get some damage upgrades so you can prevent them from actually attacking you before the Frostbite hits. But they're not, these are pretty low priority upgrades, I'd say. This is one of those cards that just does a lot unupgraded. And I listed, strong early game, boss killer as well. So I list these traits out just to go back really quick. Like, Titan's Tooth is another one. It's a boss killer. Like, the boss killer cards, I didn't make a same type of flowchart for like the spell cards, but especially coming up to that first big boss, Talos, Daedalus, whatever, you do want to try to have some boss killers around, because that's a lot of health to chunk through. It's like 600 or so, and being able to apply 8 Frostbite throughout the fight, like maybe turn 1, turn 2, you start stacking it, right? Stack it every now and then if you can afford to. That's going to be a lot of damage saved come the Relentless rounds. Maybe you put in 100 to 200 damage just purely with Flash Freeze before then, right? So definitely a boss killer. Even if you don't get it in before, just hitting it during the Relentless rounds is generally a lot of extra damage. Very similar to Wildwood Sap in that regard. Then you got Ice Storm, which definitely needs an upgrade. The thing I say with Ice Storm is when you see it offered, open up your map and see if right in your future, like literally your next path here, has a magic shop that you plan on visiting. Then take Ice Storm. If not, don't do it. That's kind of my rule there. Sometimes you can deviate there, but by the time you get offered Ice Storm, usually it's not early game in my experience. Usually it's mid to late game. It isn't uncommon. Maybe you get offered it early, who knows? But it's kind of like Plink in the sense that at 1 damage, it doesn't really do anything. It's basically a blight in your deck. I guess you can incant with it. That's about it. But once you actually add the damage, now it becomes pretty much an AoE. It's still technically pseudo AoE. You could low roll and not hit a backliner, but at 5, you're pretty unlikely for that to happen. And it's similar to Ice Storm or Ice Tornado in that it has the flexibility of being AoE when there's many enemies, but if there's just one enemy, it's also a pretty solid single target damage, especially if you got that 20 damage. And you could hold over it if you are similar to like Titan's Tooth and Glimmer. If you are facing a version of Seraph that has strong backliners, it could be your option for AoE on holdover. It's pretty much going to kill those backliners, 19 times out of 20 or so. And then Crystalline Seeds. This is something I've kind of marked as a low investment. Really doesn't need any upgrades at all to be okay. It's never a card that's going to be insanely good. It's just kind of this card that's nice to have. When you got these incant heavy decks, a 0 cost that does some pretty good stuff and consumes itself is generally just not something you're going to skip. It is some AoE. It's AoE that doesn't really prevent damage because they're still going to attack before the Frostbite applies. but it's still going to kill them, which is going to save you pyre health. It's going to give you a free incant. It can be used against a boss to get some okay damage. Like, generally just a low investment card that's not ever too bad to skip, and you're not ever too sad to just have it in your deck. Vine Grasp, this one is really more of a utility card. I mean, you can use it to kill backliners if you want. Generally, you're going to want to add these damage cards, but it's mainly useful against Talos the Pusher, I would say. But it's if you don't have it, if you have it in the deck otherwise, it can still be okay just for killing backliners. Just know that you're probably going to, by mid to late game, going to need that that damage upgrade. And on the utility note, even beyond Talos the Pusher, come mid to late game, there are some enemies where pulling the enemy to the front is just actually pretty good. Like think of like one of those mid game fights. There's the little dudes that have like 2 damage and 1 HP. I guess Sycophant, I think they're called, but they basically on extinguish when they die, they add like 2 damage to everybody in the group. There's like one of those waves where there's like 4 of them in front of a clipped wing and a Vine Grasp, and that case is like a godsend. That just prevents so much, because usually that thing's getting through to your pyre unless you have some really good way to kill it, and usually it's doing some pretty good damage to your pyre, but Vine Grasp pretty much hard counters it. And then Ice and Pyre, it's situational in that if you're not really setting up at the top, I wouldn't add it. It's not one that I'm like adding just to take advantage of like spell weakness, for example. But if I would hopefully have permafrost on it. I usually just find it's okay. Like that, we kind of talked about killing the sweeper units before they can attack your TETHYS. I like to get some damage on it, permafrost it before I need it, and then I can just play that when I'm set up at the top and take out like a Pyre Wings or a Master of Light just in one go, and Ice and Pyre is pretty good at that. Otherwise though, if you're not setting up at the top, I probably wouldn't take Ice and Pyre. It's not really powerful enough for that. Now I get the S tier utility spells. Preserve Thorns gets another mention here because it's pretty much a card draw, just even more so than it is a damage spell. But it still provides good enough damage that I listed it as a S tier damage. But really, it's the where it really shines is as a utility. Just ton of incant gas, ton of card draw, hard counter or soft counters. Seraph the Diligent, it's a good hard Hellvent target. I could even list it as like low investment because you really don't need upgrades on it. Just an Emberstone, that's about it. Razor Sharp Edge. This one, probably one of the most solid card in the game. It's never bad. It's always good at all stages of the game. There's never any combo where it's not good. You're always safe picking Razor Sharp Edge. It's even an okay Hellvent target, especially if you see like Seraph the Temperate in your future, who's going to sap your units. And especially if you don't have an Incanter DPS, you're going to want Razor Sharp Edge, maybe even on holdover. It's always good to make it free. You're never too sad to have Razor Sharp Edge free. That's just an easy incant and a ton of scaling that it adds. It also has that flexibility early game to kill backliners, which honestly, Ring 1-2, I would say I use it more to kill an enemy than I do to actually buff my own units. Just kind of fun fact about Razor Sharp Edge there. Invigorating Solution, it's kind of on the lines of Preserve Thorns. It's not going to give you the extra damage, the extra incant. It's not going to counter Diligent as well, but aside from that, it's still S tier. Like, it's still a low investment card, no upgrades needed, doesn't cost anything, it consumes itself. You draw nearly a full hand the next turn. You're never going to say no to Invigorating Solution. Now, Frenzied Swarm is just one of the most generally all these 4 cards. I honestly, I would say just every card in here. Maybe not Steel Enhancer, but all the other ones, just in a general sense, are just always going to be S tier utility spells, regardless of the combo. Frenzied Swarm is just insane. I wouldn't be surprised if this card gets nerfed at some point. To daze the entire floor, what a powerful card at only 1 Ember. My guess is it'll be at least brought up to 2 Ember, but we'll see. Until then, definitely pick it pretty much every time you see it. It's just so powerful. I mean, it stops the sweepers from killing you. It stops any just damage from coming in. It stops any effects. Like, it stops Seraph the Patient from attacking you. Like, I generally will put this on holdover if I see Seraph the Patient in my future. And just because it pretty much prevents all that insane damage that's coming in. You can't, at the very least, you can't stop Seraph the Patient from attacking, but you can if you have Frenzied Swarm, right? So just adds a ton of survivability. If you have any offering targets, it's going to be amazing there. It's never not great, and so super high floor and a really high ceiling. Like, it can just carry a run. And then Urchin Spine's a little bit of a different story here. It's just another low investment card. 0 cost, consumes itself, does a great effect. It's a free incant, and if you can play it the same floor that your incant units are on and then take advantage of that spell weakness the same turn, that's a super strong turn. You combine this with any of the good damage spells and you're pretty much clearing the entire wave out, no questions asked, right? Like Ancient Synergy plus this, no wave is going to survive that. Even like Helical Crystallis plus this is going to be fine. You're going to clear out the frontliner and then maybe have a follow-up spell for the rest. Just a really good low investment, like probably never skipping this card, right? Like, it's never just a skip. Too powerful to skip. And then Steel Enhancer, particularly, it's another card I've been growing to love more with the combos I've been doing, but like in this one, it's particularly nice in that it can make TETHYS survive, right? But even beyond that, it provides scaling of both offense and defense, so it's very flexible. I've even started to put it on holdover when I don't have better holdover targets. It's a decent holdover. I mean, it's going to give you a free incant each turn on top of the flexibility of either preserving your TETHYS. Like, you can even buff TETHYS. When it's on holdover, you can get TETHYS buffed up enough that it can survive those sweepers, right? It could even survive a Spikes trial. Or you could just put it on your frontliner just to get a really beefy frontliner that also does damage, right? Really flexible card. I would almost say low investment, but the fact that it doesn't consume itself, I think kind of... There's something special when these cards consume themselves that really makes them low investment, because then it's like, I don't know, you never have to remove them, so it's like if you don't end up using them, it's like you don't have to remove them because they already consume themselves for 0. And I doubt you'd ever not want spell weakness 2 or draw 3, right? That's kind of what's going on there. Then Unnamed Tome, slightly more situational than some of these other low investment cards, but still, it's like, it has the added benefit that it permafrosts itself. Another card I wouldn't be surprised if it got nerfed at some point. Either Ember cost or remove like the permafrost, something. There are fights where it doesn't do anything, but I find like if I compare like silence removal to buff removal, silence removal is just a million times better to me. Like, there's so many more things that silencing is useful on, like it stops Scourge Shufflers. There's some bosses it just makes a joke of, like, there's some bosses that like gain attack damage as they ascend floors. It'll stop that. There's obviously Seraph the Patient that it'll stop all those incants on and the rallies. Yeah, just a lot. I don't know, I can't even think of them all, but it's I find it usually has a target, and if it doesn't, hey, it's a free incant that you can save for whenever you need it because it's permafrosted, doesn't affect your future draws. Pretty good card. And yeah, that's the S tier utility spells. Oh, and also I should mention, I put Hellvent target specifically when patient. It's pretty nice to be able to get an early play of the silence card, and simply Hellventing it to double that chance essentially is actually pretty good against a patient, because when you're incanting really heavy, you really don't, if you can help it, you really don't want to have to deal with his incant attack gain that he gets. If you don't find Unnamed Tone, you don't find it, and you're just probably gonna severely limit how much you can incant in the fight. But if you can find this, you might as well Hellvent it, in my opinion, just to get that early silence out. And then the A tier utility spells, these are all Sometimes a little bit more situational or just less general value, but still very good. Wildwood Tome, I find this, if you need damage mitigation, it will help, especially if you have a sweeper and you couldn't find a quick upgrade. Or if you have Sweeper TETHYS, which you'll never be able to obviously find an inherent quick upgrade, but this is a great thing you can just slap on them. It was pretty common if I was going against, I put it as Seraph answer here, Patient and Temperament, because they have those strong backliners. This is a great one when I had sweep, at least one into sweep TETHYS, just to stick it on TETHYS and have her kind of carry that load of preventing all that damage. Ensnare, I listed it as low investment. While it doesn't have the consumption that a lot of the low investment cards have, it has the advantage that it basically is draw neutral. Like it basically cycles itself just in a delayed fashion, but that usually is irrelevant in my opinion. At any rate, it's a free incant, and it's also something that can really prevent either pyre damage or prevent your TETHYS from dying. Like you could stop a sweeper for a turn while you dig for a card or something. Just a very versatile low investment card that doesn't require upgrades and it's just always going to be a solid card. And then Pyrogo, also low investment, but a little situational. Like I generally found Pyrogrow, really, I don't know. Something like, I don't know if I'm dyslexic, but something it just seems like seems like it says Pyrogrow to me, but it's actually Pyrogrow. Pyrogrow, if you don't have a lot of card draw, which happens sometimes, I wouldn't take it. Card draw is a little more important than Ember in my opinion, and if you're already a little hurting on card draw, it's probably just not a good idea to take Pyrogrow. But, between just the inherent root seeds you have and hopefully the draw upgrades that you took on leveling up, that's almost already enough to justify Pyrogrow, so usually I'm able to take it. But, don't be a robot. Try to figure out if you need it or not. Wildwood Sap, this is going to be really good early game and boss killing. That's really all it serves. I'm rarely using Wildwood Sap come late game or even mid game. That being said, double stack's going to be great on it and just make it cheaper, especially if you do end up double stacking it. You still want to be able to play it at 1, but if you can, for 1 card drawn, 1 Ember played, getting 10 regen out of it, that's going to kill most bosses, right? That's going to allow you to kill most bosses as long as your unit has, maybe 20 or more health. That'll be fine, and then just stick some root seeds on them so they can deal enough damage in those relentless rounds. Wildwood Sap, definitely a card you want to look for early if you need it. Awoken's Rail Spike, another one of these low investment cards. It's like the floor is that it draws a bunch of 0 cost cards and maybe Deadweights or Scourge, who knows, but just cards that you don't really want to see. At any rate, at least got those out of the way. And even if it didn't get the effect of the -2 Ember, it still drew them and gave you hopefully a free incant if you played it on the right floor. And also in the latest patch, it kind of flew under the radar, but you'll notice these X-Cost cards now are able to get Emberstone, making them just even more powerful. So like this is already a pretty good card in a general sense, but now the fact that you can actually make it draw extra cards, like you can actually play it at a 0 cost without any artifact support. All you need is those Ember Stones on it and still get cards drawn. That's pretty good. That's pretty powerful. So it's definitely a good Ember Stone target. But yeah, Rail Spike's going to be good. Offering Token, situational, but if you have any offering targets at all, I say Offering Token is super high priority pick. And you could even put on a holdover if you have a few of them, a few offering targets, I should say. It's a free incant. It's relatively low investment, and then it kind of cycles itself. The discard, as long as you have offering to play, is usually a positive, right? And in those type of cases, Offering Token is just god tier. Just so much positive things. And with Deep Offering, it's a little awkward to play at 2 Ember, so I did generally at least try to get it down to 1 or ideally 0 Ember. But it's going to be incant gas at that point. Like if you have any offering targets, it's super good. But even without them, it's immediate card draw, which is hard to come by in this game. and to just draw 5 whole new cards, yeah, that's pretty good. Deep Offering, a pretty good card. Then we got the B tier utility spells. I figured they're still worth mentioning because they're taken enough in my runs and perform well enough while not being on the level of those previous slides. Still just pretty good cards. Preserve, low investment, doesn't consume itself, but it costs 0. It's already permafrosted by default, and usually, even if it's just a free incant, it's okay. But a lot of times you're able to just use it. And permafrost, say a Spike of the Stygian or something, to either wait for the boss round to sap them big, or just wait for a sweeper to sap them big, or Siren Song. A very flexible card, very low investment. Probably not too sad to see it, even when it's not doing much for you. It's still doing stuff for you. Drain's it's pretty good, especially with TETHYS always needing ways to survive. 3 sap, you could just play it at any point, even if you're at the top floor. If you just play that on a sweeper at the bottom, by the time they get to the top, they're still not doing enough to kill you. Even better if you can double stack it. If you can double stack it, it's so great to play this against the bosses. That's 6 sap, minus 12 damage. You could even stack it a few times if you have a few floors and you can cycle a lot and you have a relatively thin deck. Or I wouldn't say I put it on holdover or anything, but just pretty good. Definitely a boss killer. TETHYS survival, that's the main reasons for Drain. And Guardian's Amulet, little situational. I would say if you don't have a lot of discard, or like an artifact that either gives you a ton of extra ember or makes like spells that cost less than this get reduced, I would say Guardian's Amulet might not be worth it. 2 sap is not like super great for 3 ember if we're just playing it as a card as is. But if you have a lot of discard, especially like an Offering Token, Guardian's Amulet's really good. And if any of those other artifacts are present, it's pretty good. Otherwise, I wouldn't really take it though. Spike the Stygian is really good for pretty similar reasons that Drain is. It has, I guess, the added benefit that it can have a bit higher of a ceiling, I would say. And it also adds some damage, but generally it's going to be same as Drain. I find the sap is really what I'm using it for, not really the frostbite, even though that is a decent amount of frostbite it applies. Definitely a boss killer though, like that frostbite and sap together. Ooh-wee. If you can permafrost that on top of double stack, play all your energy into it the turn that the boss is right on your floor. It goes a long way towards helping kill those bosses, especially if they're a multi-striker. And then Focus Growth, I'd say it's situational in that if you're not making use of the heal, I wouldn't probably take it just for the draw. I mean, you already have Root Seeds. This isn't really doing much extra than a Root Seeds don't already do. But if you do have, say, like a Siren of the Sea or a Titan Sentry as your frontliner, or Husk, and you don't have like Runestone Incant, it's pretty good to have a big heal that also draws cards. In those type of situations, Focus Growth is pretty good. I wouldn't really, you could put on a holdover, I guess, but I wouldn't really. I'd just kind of, unless you're like against Seraph the Patient, you could maybe argue it if you need that much healing each turn, which you might if you're melee weakness or whatnot. But I think there's better ways to deal with Seraph the Patient. Speaking of better ways to deal with Seraph the Patient, we got Siren Song here. It's always going to be okay to just have that option, especially when you're setting up at the top, to just throw everything up above you. Generally, they're not going to get too many hits in on the pyre, if any. So damage mitigation is kind of the base, TETHYS survival as well, but particularly I find where it shines is against Seraph the Patient. You could put on a holdover, you could double stack it, you could permafrost it, whatever. Either one of these, ideally 2 of them, is going to be great. I often hunt for holdover on it if I know Seraph the Patient is my future, because you're basically, you set up at the top. Even if you don't set up at the top, at least when he's at the top, you just play it and just start stacking Dazed on him. Especially if you didn't find Silence, a great way around still allowing yourself to incant as much as you want is to simply just stack so much Dazed on him that it doesn't really matter by the time he gets to you for the Relentless rounds. If he has 10 to 12 Dazed on him, you're probably killing him just fine with your buffed up units, right? And then Adaptive Mutation, I would say just the situation here is if you have Nameless Siren, I wouldn't really take it otherwise. It can be okay. Sometimes it can be okay for TETHYS survival as well, but really I think the way it shines is just turning your Nameless Siren into a kind of a tank in a way. If not a tank, at least like by the time the Relentless rounds come around, if your tank does die, you get, maybe 3 or 4 extra hits out of your Nameless Siren, which is pretty damn good just for a single play of a card, right? Then we got the artifacts here. In the great tier, these are pretty much just always going to be good. Founding Seal, as we said, incant's the main strategy here, so having them, it's just, what can you say about Founding Seal? Just broken. Split Anvil, also very good. That's going to allow you to pretty much play out all your hands each turn. There's so many 3 and 2 costs, great cards in this combo, Titan's Tooth, Ice Storm, you can even start taking things like Guardian's Amulet, like Cycle of Life, any of these things. They're turning everything into 0 for the turn. You could even put it on a holdover so that you're guaranteed to do that every turn. That's pretty insane. Cuddlebeard, you could say it's situational, but really, how often are you playing Stygian and not having Frostbite, right? I would say maybe 99 out of 100 times, honestly. And to have that Frostbite, basically, I almost don't care about the extra stacks. I really just care that it doesn't decay. That's just pretty much making it add so much damage to Seraph and those big bosses that kind of stick around the whole fight, right? And even just the waves. If you're, it adds a lot of damage there too. And then spell weakness to the top floor. Yeah, pretty much in Urchin Spines, every time an enemy comes to your top floor, it turns out to be pretty good. If you have any sort of damage at all, which you will, you're just going to delete the entire thing, and you probably just set up at the top floor at that point anyway. Pretty good. And TETHYS Scales, similar to Totem Fragment, not quite as consistent, but a little more versatile, I would say. Not every deck sets up at the top, and for the ones, this is going to be good no matter what type of positioning you're going for. Half the time getting a spell weakness, usually just 2 is kind of overkill, usually 1's all you need. If you have any sort of heavy hitting spells, Ancient Synergy, Helical Chrysalis, even Ice Storm, usually 1's all you need, and that's going to be pretty good. Emblem of the Exiles, well, certainly not going to have any issues with TETHYS dying at that point. You can, those early rings, you can just play her on her own floor, let her get some health, and then play the units after that, if you need to. Usually you don't even need to, but otherwise it's just free 5 HP every single turn for your frontliner. That's pretty good. It falls off a little bit late game, but even late game I find that extra health is pretty nice to have. And especially if you're running heals, like, that's extra max HP that once you get like a good heal, it just kind of amplifies that value all back into itself. And then Thorn Fruit, always going to be good. It's a free draw upgrade. As we've said, draw upgrades are generally the best upgrade you can get. And on top of that, it's a nice incant each turn and some extra damage each turn. Against Seraph the Diligent, pretty much hard counters him. Never going to be sad to see Thorn Fruit. And then these 2 cavern events here, my 2 favorite cavern artifacts by far. Real Forger's Hammer is just going to guarantee that you can play when you get pip fucked, you don't actually get pip fucked because you'll have that extra space just to play out your kind of standard 2 banner units and TETHYS on whatever floor you want. And then Abandoned Stave, just a lot of extra energy. I've kind of come to the realization that Vengeful Shards really aren't that bad. Like, it's only like 1 damage to your pyre if you don't play them, which is really nothing. And to get whatever this adds, just adds like 2 Vengeful Shards, I believe, but you already have the 2 Deadweights initially, so you're getting 2 level ups worth of Ember. That's pretty good. You could even at some point remove those Vengeful Shards if you needed to. Abandoned Stave pretty much never going to be bad. And then these are just kind of not quite on the power level of these, or a little more situational. The Silence has general power level, but I typically like it against like Seraph the Patient. Well, okay. In theory, I like it against Seraph the Patient. I know that it can work on him. I know it can. I've seen it happen, but it literally never does for me. But in theory, it should be good. It should be a 50% chance to basically soft counter his, or hard counter his incant and soft counter him as a whole. It just never happens. It never seems to have to happen, but I've seen it happen, so theoretically it's good. Sap Tap, you know, obviously this one's situational. If you have heals, it's good. If it's not, it's useless. Same with Thorn and Channel Heart. If you have stings, great. If not, nope. Forever Flame, this is just generally always going to be good. Only Lodestone Totem costs more than 1, so you're never getting the full value here, but hey, if you have Lodestone Totem, this is a great one to have. And even if you don't, it's never bad to just have your units be free, right? And then Hammered Chest Plates, this one really just comes down to Tethys. It gives her that extra damage, which might allow you to do spikes or just survive sweepers. And that's the artifacts. Now, the specific versions of Seraph here. How you want to prepare for each one. So I've kind of listed the units here that you want to look out for, and then we just got the effects here. So with Seraph the Chaste, you know, it's going to remove your buffs and debuffs. That's not really that relevant to these. I mean, you're not really building spikes or regen as your main game plan, and that's really the things that Chaste punishes. I don't find Rage and like Frostbite removal are really that punishing. Nameless Siren gains so much per incant of Rage that all of the Rage it removes really isn't that bad. Even if a few extra waves get by, so what, in my opinion. Like usually, especially if you have like Frostbite, Tethys, it just doesn't matter. By the time you get around to Seraph, you'll beat her just fine. Really what you have to game plan against Chaste is just these Pyre Wings. So just your typical things that you would survive sweeping by. So, you know, sap, HP gain, heavy hitting spells, dazed. You know, those things are going to allow you to survive with Tethys. And, you know, as I said, yeah, they're not, why did I say, it's supposed to be Nameless Siren. I always call it Naga Siren. I don't know why. I feel like that would be cooler though. Naga Siren. Yeah, whatever. And then extra Ember, you know, it does Ember drain you. Conduit probably doesn't worry about that, but you might, where, you know, normally you're taking double draw. If you think you need it, you might just take an Ember upgrade just to help with this. That could be an option. And then that's Chase. Chase really isn't too bad. No, honestly, none of them are too bad. Patient's probably the only one that can't be bad, but as long as you get Silence, it's not too bad. If you don't, or Silence or Siren Song will pretty much hard counter Patient. The two of them together, ideally, but either one of them should be pretty good. Anyway, though, so on to Diligent. Diligent has my vote for the easiest version of Seraph in a general sense, but certainly here. The only unit you really need to worry about is Purifier. For that reason, sometimes against Diligent, I'll set up at the bottom, even if I was like setting up at the top for most of my fights in that run. Unless I think I can kill Purifier just with spells here and there. I think it's probably just smart to set up at the bottom, because even then you just get the incants, and I generally just want to maximize all my incants. And I can, if I don't kill Seraph, usually I've hopefully put a point into the sweeping version of Tethys. I'll probably just have spell weakness to follow up on the next 2 floors. Find a big hitter and just kill Seraph. But anyway, you know, try to kill his Purifiers. You don't want them getting through each 3 floors and getting their Scourges off. That's one way you can certainly lose to Diligent. And then, you know, just add extra spells. Don't, you know, I talked about those low investment spells. Those are great to just keep adding if you see Diligent in your future, even if you don't think you need them. Like, if you don't think you need to preserve or whatever, just add it. It'll be permafrosted, 0 cost. If there's a turn where you don't have a good consume target, you can just use it then. It's pretty good for that. And then for Seraph the Patient, there's kind of a few things. You don't want to get too cocky. Like, you could have an Unnamed Tone and still lose. I've done that before with other points with this, right? When I was kind of developing the strategy. But Unnamed Tome will go a long way to at least allowing you to incant as much as you want. That's mainly what you get out of Unnamed Tome. It's pretty, useful. I don't want to downplay it, but it's not the end all be all. And if you get it, hell vent it. I think I've said that before, but anyway, all that does is it takes care of the incant problem. It doesn't take care of all the problems. Like, you're still going to have melee weakness to deal with, and you're still going to have some of these shade wings you got to deal with. So, as I've said, Siren Song is going to be a great way to stop Seraph the Patient from getting those damage in on you. Also, if you couldn't find Siren Song, Frenzied Swarm is decent too. You could even double stack it if you want to try to stack Dazed on him, but I generally don't go that route. I usually just use it to mitigate the immediate damage. Yeah, consistent AoE to kill these backliners so they're not doing a ton of damage to you, and a good frontliner. You really need a good frontliner here, or at least have the frontliner on Endless. If you don't have Siren Song or Frenzied Swarm, or like Restoring Retreat, you just can't mitigate the damage that Seraph comes in. Even if you silenced him, let's say he got a few incants in, he's at like 25 damage before you silence him, that might be an average situation you might run into. Even if you clear out the whole wave, you're still melee weakness, so you're still taking 50 frickin' damage from Seraph, right? So if you don't have a good frontliner that can deal with that type of damage coming in, you're going to be screwed. So really patient still requires the most answers, Seraph the Balanced. So, prepare accordingly. And then Seraph the Temperate, pretty much just objectively easier. It's like the same fight as Patient, just objectively easier. True, you'll have a little bit more minions to deal with, but you don't have melee weakness to deal with, and you don't have Seraph just hitting you each turn, and you don't have to deal with him rallying and incanting. Yeah. Rant complete there. But anyway, yeah, just consistent AoE. These are going to be the main things that hurt you in this fight, is the Shade Wings. Once you understand that you need consistent AoE for this fight, it becomes much easier. It might even be the easiest version of Seraph, in my opinion. The only other thing is the sap. If you're going the incant route, you don't care about this sap at all. Really, just if you didn't end up with the incant DPS unit, say you have like Husk or Icy Siliphyte as your DPS unit, like a sweeper unit that doesn't necessarily have a lot of starting damage, you're going to want to hunt, hopefully, for like a buff card like Razor Sharp Edge, or even like Steel Enhancer, but ideally Razor Sharp Edge, and you might even put it on a holdover, because, since these are single floor setups, typically, you're going to get sapped a lot, and if you don't have enough damage, eventually you'll just be doing 0 damage, and that's not a good thing to have on your backliner, right? But I digress. And this is the final part. Just going over some run data to kind of give you an idea, data-wise, maybe visually here, of what I was typically rolling with. So by far the biggest ones were the Sirens. Not Siren of the Sea, the most flexible one. Got the way I'm counting this, by the way, is at the end of my run, did it show up in the screen? And if it showed up twice, I'm not counting it twice. So like Siren of the Sea, if I had like 2 of her in a run, I would just count it once here in this number. So in 18 of these, this is the 31 win streak. In 18 of them, Siren of the Sea was present. 15, Nameless Siren was present, so on and so forth. So anyway, definitely the top 3 are these nice incanting units, and Lodestone right after. Just not going to show up as much simply because it's a rare, so not going to get offered as much, but definitely just on the same level as these 3, if not better. And then, other than that, it's probably just variants. They're all kind of low numbers, but Husk Hermit was pretty good because, similar to Siren of the Sea, it fills both roles. Just doesn't fill them quite as well. You're not getting that natural scaling or anything, but especially early game Husk Hermit is nice to have, and it's flexible enough that I don't end up really, even if I don't end up using it by end game, I'm not necessarily removing it unless I really need to. Glacial Seal, I was using it every now and then just for some extra damage, but I don't actually think Glacial Seal is necessarily that good. It's a little overcosted at 2 Ember, and it's not like it gives an insane amount of Frostbite. Really, I just added it at certain points in the game to get me through some of those boss killing needs, but usually by end game it was really unnecessary for me to have Glacial Seal. I just never really got around to removing them. And then kind of so on and so forth here. You're usually just going to see the A and B tiers here, making up some of that other part. We already went over TETHYS upgrades, but just kind of reiterating kind of what the commonalities here were. Same with Pyre upgrades. And then spell cards. Root Seeds, never removed all of them. In fact, I don't think I ever removed a Root Seeds. I think Root Seeds is hands down the best basic card in the game. It provides like light scaling, but awesome card draw, incants. Like, there's just such a good card. Frozen Lance, on 4 of the runs, I completely removed them. Quick note on Frozen Lance. It's really not that great, right? But I think it's slightly underrated. I dare say that just because I always see it kind of listed as the de facto worst of the basic cards. I actually think Plink is the worst basic card, and this is a close second place. So, giving you a little love there, Frozen Lance. But anyway, it doesn't change the fact that it's pretty bad, right? Like, I'm removing it completely from my deck in a deck that is typically incant focused, so it's pretty bad, right? By late game, it's doing nothing for you other than providing incants and just a little bit of extra damage. But early game, it's not too bad. I honestly don't think it's very... Plink is good early game too, but I think Frozen Lance falls off less hard than Plink. Which is splitting hairs, but whatever. No need to get into that too much. Then the first non-basic card here is actually Razor Sharp Edge. As I said, never is it ever bad to have in a deck. Super flexible, provides scaling, provides backline killing. It's just a really good card. I was surprised when it got that buff up to 10 damage because it was already a really good card at 8 damage. But I'll take it. And then just kind of, you see a lot of the utility and damage cards that I listed out before. Invigorating Solution, Frenzied Swarm, Ice Tornado. The only reason, and it's kind of splitting hairs on a few, like Preserve Thorns at 14 and Invigorating Solution at 16. I would say generally Preserve Thorns is a way better card. But just, Invigorating was offered more, so that's just kind of what happens there. There's obviously going to be variance within these numbers, but... yeah, and I won't go through each of them, but you can kind of look at them and just see. It kind of reinforces how I've laid out my ratings of the cards and kind of the cards that were present in a lot of my wins. So that's pretty much the guide. Hopefully it was useful. I'm also going to include, as I said before, the link to the playlist of the 31 win streak. So if you want to see it in action, that might be the best way to really see if there's things I said that weren't clear. They'll be a lot clearer when you see those runs. I add commentary on probably 80% of the runs I do, and I try to explain my decision making process before it happens and why I make the decisions I make. So yeah, until next time, peace.